You're listening to Francis Oblivion and the Mad Undead by J. Johnson Higgins. This audiobook edition is a Kiss the Widow production.
Chapter 6. A Monster with Many Faces.
Journal of Diego M.R. Azhar, south of the Western Front. 107 years ago. Continued. The creature had followed me into the mountains. Just him, not the other shadows. But I did not know this until a day later. I discovered this fact by accident. I got lost and turned around, and by chance, I spied the commander scouting my tracks on the muddy road from the previous morning. I left the main road to hide quietly within a nearby cave. The most intense moment was when I saw the commander appear again at the cave mouth and stop. He briefly inspected the opening, looked inside but lost interest and continued. I did not dare move for nearly an hour, in fear that he was waiting for me right outside. Eventually, I did move, however, and I stayed clear of my previous path. I took a completely different direction in hopes of throwing him off my tail. Why me? I kept asking myself. I was left with a series of questions, but only later would I understand what any of my experiences with the specter meant, or learn what this evil creature was. What I did know was that this being was among us for much longer, but just not physically. It had penetrated my dreams, haunted and killed my companions, and sought me long before meeting us on the battlefield. I'd just been lucky enough to elude him, unknowingly at first, and then deliberately. Now detached from our forces, and the sole survivor of my unit, I ventured south and then east to cross the border on foot to a neutral country, Kaland. I needed to be away from the battle, and I needed to disappear. I forgot to mention, I did get an opportunity before leaving the battlefield to examine Arnold Locke's remains, say my last goodbye, and retrieve his letter. This confirmed for me that I was seeing an impersonator of my friend, and not the actual, because he had not moved an inch from his resting place. It was such a terrible way to go, and I know he was suffering from a relentless fever before his unfortunate end. It must have been so unpleasant to feel that way, and then meet your end in such a dark place. Along the way through Kaland, an older gentleman of a nearby town found me wandering on my own. I'm sad to say that I do not remember the gentleman's name beyond his first, even though he was so accommodating and kind to me, and had told me his name more than once. He had let me rest in his house, fed me, gave me fresh clothes that were too large but were clean, and gave me some of his wine. Once I was in better spirits. His name was Hugo. I didn't want to burden him and intended to leave soon after meeting him, but he insisted I stay for a little while longer. He was a medical doctor and wanted me to rest after the trek. He asked me about my travels and my experience, and later was particularly curious about how I came to be detached from my unit when he found me. I feared the stigma of leaving or fleeing the battle, and what it could mean to others, or even if my affiliation would make an instant enemy of someone otherwise friendly to me. But I feared the demonic mercenary even more than the battle, so yes, I'd flee again if the situation ever repeated. I did not choose this land or this cause. I was put at ease when I learned that, apparently, I was not the first soldier to cross Hugo's path on the way into neutral territory, and he had aided several from both sides of the conflict when he could. I was, however, traveling alone and with little to no injury besides very minor things like bruises, scratches, insect bites, fatigue, and my relentless hunger. The others in worse condition were in an actual hospital or triage center that could not waste a bed with me. He transported them. They were in the places that Hugo went to during the day while I rested. In the evenings, we would converse. Relinquishing my story to Hugo was a small price to pay for volunteering the hospitality of his own home. After resting, I explained my incident to him. I was reluctant at first to go into detail about the specter on the battlefield, but it was necessary to explain how I'd come to be where I was, with no companions, and, in a way, suffering from the worst wound of all, witnessing the demon's carnage. As soon as I described the specter, he became very concerned, as if he knew something about this thing that I saw. He set his drink down and was still, as if I'd just brought the demon in to meet him or informed him that it was standing right outside waiting at his door and ready to come in. He checked his doors and windows and said a very quick prayer of some kind in another language.
So you've actually seen him?
Hugo started.
You're alive right now and you've seen him? How far away was he when you last saw him? Did he follow you here?
He immediately asked. I answered that it was in the neighboring country, which was at war, that I first saw him, and that I'd traveled on foot over the border. I last saw him just over the border, but, to my knowledge, I was not being followed anymore. I'd lost him. There was another instance where I thought I'd seen him again and thought that he was following me, but it was a false alarm. I thought I saw a figure waiting for me at the end of the road. It was enough to make me stop and step off the path again after my initial scare. The figure turned out to be a scarecrow, and an effective one at that. It sure scared me. I could see Hugo going over all of what I'd said to him in his mind, and he remained silent. Had you seen him before? I asked.
No.
He shook his head. But you know what he is?
What he is? No, but I know of him.
He simply replied. As you can imagine, I became the one asking questions of him from that point forward. He filled our glasses again and set his wine aside. Here's what I learned. This specter was well known in Greater Kaeland, which encompassed Arland, Thurland, as well as this neutral country of Kaeland, for which the entire peninsula was named. But most people did not interact with him, and the vast majority did not necessarily take his presence for fact. He was the subject of an old story to them. He was seen as a who of considerable power and mystery rather than a what, for he must have made a name for himself long before anyone considered investigating or deciding to classify him as a demon, spirit, possessed human, or even a savage sorcerer. He was a recurring folk figure. The fact that I'd experienced him without any prior knowledge of the local stories only lent credibility to the authenticity of the story, and from then on, I could believe that anything in this region was possible, and that this was indeed cursed land. I'd seen my first real monster in my entire life and didn't even know it until after it had killed so many people. There were many stories like this in this part of the world, and many had to do with the otherworldly demons and creatures hiding in the corner of our vision. Some were simple tales of caution, like, if you drop money in the woods, you must leave a share, or all of it, or face a grave misfortune. Some stories explained the origins of natural phenomena like fog, while others explained nothing, but discussed odd or recurring beings that we should avoid if possible. One such story, our story, was that of Francis Oblivion. His story dates back 18 centuries, and today comes to us in several forms. The oldest story I will get to in a moment, but there were several that ultimately led me to the conversation revealing it. Some described him as an undead warrior of the spirit world with a vendetta against the living. Another telling casts him as a demon sent forth from hell on a mission to feed his hellion followers the flesh of humankind. From what I'd learned, I'd say those renditions claimed to know too much about him and his core intentions, but they appeared to be right about the targeting of humans, feedings, and hunger. Sure, he does these things, but I doubt anyone truly knows why. Among the archival materials and history of the area, there is a mention of a Francis who is consistent with these stories, but his last name is actually Mannion, and he was the noble ruler of a now-lost principality in these parts. This figure is the prominent intersection with the legend. Hugo showed me a painting of this old ruler. He had piercing, mean eyes, a tight face, a beard, and a walrus mustache fit for a Kaiser. His chest was riddled with medals, sashes, and aiguillettes. My instinct was to say that this was not the man that I'd seen on the battlefield, as he was clean-shaven, but Hugo had plenty more to say first. I let him speak, and things began to make more sense to me. Hugo explained that Sir Francis Mannion's image in the painting looked considerably like a farmer who had also lived during the same general period about 100 years ago, but who had died under mysterious circumstances shortly before the ruler came to power. Fortunately, the farmer's son had sketched his father's portrait, a rather small one, and I'd gotten the chance to see it as well. Hugo showed me. The image side by side with the other was startlingly similar. The farmer was less refined, poorer looking in dress, thinner, but the general features were there. Hugo explained the circumstances of the farmer's death, and I'd gotten a chill from looking into the portrait's eyes again. The experience was familiar. The farmer allegedly became ill shortly before his death, suffering from an intense fever that would not go away. He became bedbound for weeks until one day he was found completely drained of his blood. Many suspected it was murder, but it was never proven. One major complication being that bloodletting was the favored means of curing illness at that time, and the farmer's son, who had sketched the portrait, said that they were open to that treatment. He was away briefly at the time of his death and could not confirm that anyone used the procedure, but he was certain that it was not his regular doctor to perform it because he vehemently opposed the practice and refused. Interestingly, the farmer's son died soon after and in his sleep. The emergence of Francis Mannion, who looked just like the farmer following the farmer's burial, gave rise to a rumor that after the farmer's death, he had risen from the grave in a fit of rage to conquer the land and seek out his killer, perhaps now possessed by a cruel and restless spirit. But this is just a rumor and not the oldest story of him, I might add. In all the earlier renditions of Francis, he was a brutal leader and rumored to be a cannibal who ate his enemies and drank their blood from a goblet. Some say he could change his shape or steal faces from others if it suited him, and many victims were left in his wake. Some said he could even become animals such as pets if he needed to get close to his enemies undetected. His reputation is that of a builder of conflict, ferryman of death, annihilator of families, spirit collector, and soul eater. All the descriptions were vague, but given my brief experience, quite accurate. But discrepancies remained on what his intentions were and even how he operated. Early on, most thought that Francis was sapping the life of others, and upon their death they returned as undead creatures under his command, much like the first rumors of the farmer. In this way, Francis was rarely ever seen, and it was his puppets acting on his behalf. This concept was later challenged, however. Some who have investigated the figure, such as Hugo, claimed that Francis gradually stole the essence of others and could use their image as a trick to lure and sometimes mock new victims. Therefore, it was he, Francis, who was the monster walking about with another's image, not the dead loved ones despite looking, smelling, and sounding like them. This caused people to look back at the farmer's story and wonder, had Francis simply murdered the farmer, stolen his face, one of many, and later ruled with it? This understanding became the most widely accepted one, especially given that the farmer's body was exhumed, found intact, and staked to the ground so it would never rise again. Francis Mannion was still seen after pinning the body to the ground and having the grave under watch for several nights. Widely accepted does not mean correct or settled. Even this concept, one monster stealing many faces, was challenged by locals who said that perhaps we all are putting too much stock into the physical body when we are dealing with restless spirits who do not need the physical body anymore. From this view, it would stand to reason that, like other supernatural beings, the body remains where you leave it, staked or not, but the spirit walks on in ways that are no longer subject to the limits of the mortal world. So, yes, maybe we are still dealing with dead who return. From these variations, I hope I've demonstrated that this creature is not well understood, and even less is understood about his followers. Again, I say these variations claim to know too much when some combination of these ideas may be true. What is known is that Francis Mannion ruled for nearly a century without aging before the nation's recent unification and his loss of relevance within the greater state of Thurland. He disappeared after this. In this new light, agelessness, Francis, or perhaps the work of him, had existed long before the farmer's death, and this was only one incident over 18 centuries that happened to stir identity questions, and all because of a farmer's sketch by his son prior to their deaths. One consistent theme on the image of Francis is that he is dynamic and undefined in many ways. Hugo stated that,
"Whenever he takes a form, you're never quite seeing him. He creates a clever personalized distraction to keep you from seeing him, and it almost always works by occupying your mind with other things that emotionally cloud your judgment, a loved one, a friend, etc."
Hugo explained that Francis is a manipulator that could enter people's minds and force them to do things without their knowing. On more than one occasion, he has forced those under his possession to sign his name, and others acted on that authority, like hypnosis.
"We can tell when he is around because he deprives us of sleep. That is how he slowly kills us. We get tired, depressed, ill, then we die,"
Hugo said.
"The hallucinations we have when we are tired are like doors for him, and the negative things we say, open them. We in turn begin to believe these negative things. Please try to get your sleep and you will be less pessimistic."
Despite some confusion about him, Francis is said to have ruthless followers in most accounts. If the followers were human, Hugo was rather convinced that they were corpses of humans who died long ago, perhaps in other battles, but were now reanimated and slightly different from whatever it is that Francis is. He said that they were not just aimless puppets, but that they had a chaotic restlessness, a tense and destructive way about them.
"They're not just dead that walk or echoes of the living, like a ghost. They have always tried to harm. They search for life and destroy it, always consuming,"
Hugo said.
"Francis gives them power and opportunities to do so. They cause nothing but trouble and cannot be left unchecked. They're sort of mad undead, not just a remnant. They are of the kind of energy that hexes draw from. They were never good when they were living, and they are even worse after death as reanimated corpses."
I can attest that Francis has followers willing to carry out his will without question, and every act was to destroy and rifle through precious life. Where did Francis come from? I'd asked. Why is he here? How do we stop him? I immediately thought that these were futile questions, but interestingly, Hugo had responses. He did not have the specific responses I may have been looking for, but he certainly had the best ones I could have possibly received at the time.
I won't pretend to know the answers to those questions. Why is anyone here?
He threw back at me.
But in my opinion, Francis is a spirit of violence and war who chooses to possess humankind when an opportunity arises.
Hugo explained.
He feeds on it. Where did Francis come from? I don't know, but he never quite goes away. Every 100 years or so his followers reappear, though. He produces war among humans, enters it on both sides of the conflict, and while we are fighting, he feeds on us and nourishes his followers. That we see a pattern of. There are rumors of how to stop him, but no one knows if they are true. He is still among us after all. For example, I heard that he can be killed only by his own blade, and that it must be put through his heart. The problem with that is that no one has seen this done before, and if you are seeing him, he is likely already several moves ahead of you, making it impossible to carry out. To put it another way, Francis lets you see him deliberately, so it's a bit of a paradox.
Journal of Diego M.R. Azhar, a later reflection. There was no doubt that the being Hugo described was the one I had witnessed. It all made sense. Francis had burrowed into our minds somehow. He had stolen the face of a recently deceased soldier who was very ill before his death, or perhaps resurrected his spirit in a dark associated form. It was he who directed our highest commanding officers to give nonsensical orders to storm the battlefield on a regular basis. He who led us into traps and forced us into sleepless nights. It was he leading the force of violent brutes with precision. He'd done so for nearly 2 millennia. It was he who was responsible for the infantrymen that were never accounted for. He had caused the sun to vanish for days at a time behind ghostly gray clouds. He caused the moon to turn red for months at a time. I would guess that he was responsible for the whole war that brought me to him in the first place. He was a general maker of conflict and misunderstandings among those who should not be warring with one another, hopping back and forth where he could and stirring tension. Our adversaries in this war used to be our allies. The most unsettling aspect of Hugo's description was that most do not survive long after seeing Francis take a form. This was the source of Hugo's fear. Perhaps Francis was following me and now knew about Hugo. If this was the case, I needed to be out of his proximity soon, because Francis cares nothing about the other people near his targets. It meant the death of all my other companions, so far. The creature sought my blood for consumption, but fed my companions to his followers. Why was Francis looking for me? What made me special? That was the question. I did not know. Journal of Diego M.R. Azhar, a much later reflection. Not dated. I'd found my great-grandfather's journal, and the whole picture became much clearer. After some looking into this, I learned that my great-grandfather, Atrin Forsyth, had faced this very monster I now face. He had the same curse of being sought by the demon, but apparently, he'd learned why this was the case, and learned how Francis could be stopped. Clearly, he failed, but he knew. Francis must have been aware that he knew, and this secret was apparently passed along in some form that is not obvious to me. What did my great-grandfather know? I do not have the exact answer at present. I will detail my findings should I discover more.
Excerpt from Diego M.R. Azhar's Last Will and Testament.
3 items to go to the youngest living relative. 1. This pen. 2. This journal. 3. This letter.
Editor's note. The youngest relative upon Diego's death happened to be the infant Rebecca T. Diaza.
Dear loved one, if you are reading this, it is because I have passed away. Forgive me that it must be in this indirect form that I discuss something so immensely important. What is important? A force has haunted me for some time, and its followers appear every century. Its name is Francis, and it will appear again by the time you are an adult. When it does, our world will be in grave danger. Please read my journal, and you will understand what I say. The blessing. For your protection in the face of this threat, I leave to you a special pen passed down through the ages. Write with it, create your own words with it, and it will protect you. The ink is not important, just the use of the pen itself. The pen is no ordinary instrument. It has special powers which I have only scratched the surface of, but one of those powers is protection. I didn't know it at the time, but the pen protected me throughout the war. The curse. While it is true that the special pen will make it difficult for Francis to sense you or harm you, it will also be what makes him choose you as his primary target. Why? The pen once belonged to Francis, I learned, and he wants it back. You must never give it back. The pen and the knowledge of its power are the only advantage that a human can have against him. If it is ever returned, we are all doomed. My request. With this knowledge, I make this special request. You must succeed where I have not in defeating this evil creature because it grows stronger with each century. In your time, I fear that it will become so powerful that it may not ever rest again, and neither will its followers. I have seen over the years that we as humans have become more and more sophisticated at developing instruments of war. The weapons of the day will ultimately find themselves in Francis's hands to be used against us. You must not let him win. Love, Diego.
This story is 100% original and written by a human, yours truly, the author. AI was not used to write, prompt, organize, or otherwise generate this story. This audiobook edition was, however, created using licensed text-to-voice software with a lifelike casting and intonation manually adjusted and refined line by line by me, and art in and of itself. The theme music was written and produced by Kiss the Widow. If you like what you've found so far, please like and follow, subscribe, and share. Also, please be sure to check out my socials.